Ladies and gentlemen, in my hands, or just about in my hands, is not the brand new RTX 5090. Oh, I know, boo, hiss, we want to see it. But realistically, I'd argue that this is probably a lot more important because when was the last time we had a brand new graphics card launched that costs a mere $219. I mean, we can build a full budget gaming PC system that's going to be awesome for 1080p and 1440p gaming for literally less than half the price of just a graphics card. So join us as we actually go through all of the parts that we have on our desk here today, how easy or difficult everything goes together, and then of course at the end we're going to show you those all-important gameplay benchmark numbers so you can see exactly how this graphics card and this system actually performs. It is going to be a pretty epic and hopefully not very bumpy ride, so join us for everything you need to know right after a short word from this video's sponsor. Corsair's new IQ-Link Titan RX coolers have arrived, bringing high-performance cooling to your gaming PC. Thanks to the IQ-Link ecosystem and interconnecting Corsair RX fans, installation is a breeze. It's compatible with both new and existing Intel and AMD chips, and thanks to the high static pressure fans and the new flow drive cooling engine pump, you can expect to game hard or staying cool and quiet. Learn more about this incredible cooler today with a link down below. So yeah, I think it's fair to say that this is probably not going to be the most cutting edge graphics card in the world when it comes to performance, but realistically, how many GPUs do you know that have launched to about $200, and how many cards do you know that are pushing the boat out when it comes to the VRAM capacity? Because this is the ASRock Challenger B570, but as you'll see, this 10 gigabytes of VRAM that you have on this card itself. If you go for the B580, that will step up to 12 gig. But even at 1080p, there are going to be certain games, if you turn all of the bells and whistles on, highest textures, then you're going to find that 8 gigabytes isn't enough. And I don't want you to go thinking that just because you've got 8 gigabytes of VRAM, you're going to run into problems in all of your games, because that's absolutely not the case. It's more the case at the moment that that can happen in certain scenarios, but as time goes on, obviously more and more games are going to release that will need more VRAM, and having that little bit extra cushion of the 10 or 12 is going to make a significant difference in the titles that use and demand it. As you can see, this is not the largest graphics card in the world. I will say though that it's not going to be the outright most power efficient. It should be a fair bit better than the previous generation Arc cards, but they still recommend a 600 watt power supply if you are pairing it with this. You probably can get away with lower if you're using a more budget-friendly CPU, which you almost certainly will be, but it is something you should definitely bear in mind. But of course, the graphics card is just one part of the equation, and I'd say actually the hardest bit of getting a budget-friendly gaming PC is not choosing the GPU, because that's one part. You can almost just filter it from low to high, look at some reviews, and you'd be good to go. Getting a complete system that you're not spending too much money on one component and really extracting the most performance you can at your budget, now that is tricky, and that's what we've aimed to do here. If you do want to see a rig that's actually probably slightly cheaper than this, and in some cases is actually going to have slightly more performance, you can find my full cheapest B580 video in the top right corner of your screen. But I found that that compromised really in terms of what it could offer in the future, but then also today I'm far more comfortable actually recommending that what we have here on our desk today, because it is going to be a more complete PC today and into the future. And it actually starts with this. This is an A620M motherboard. So this is obviously a fair bit cheaper than B650. If you can buy B650 for the same sort of price of this, it is what I would recommend really. There's not huge amounts of differences other than the fact that you will tend to get PCI Generation 5 on an SSD for B650, but not really that important. But then also the power delivery of the motherboard should be a little bit better, which means if you do want to upgrade it at a later date to a really high-end CPU, it's going to be more accommodating, whereas this is pretty much more geared towards 65 watt CPUs that we have here today, maybe slightly higher. But if you do decide to go and drop like a Ryzen 9 in it, it's definitely still going to work, but you just might be a little bit limited when it comes to the amount of power that can go into this whilst keeping everything cool, and the performance in theory could suffer. But as you can see, this is a micro ATX board, so you can get a smaller chassis if you want to go down that route. I/O is still fairly decent though. You've got USB-C, really fast USB-A as well, and then you do also have this BIOS flashback button, so if you did want to grab a newer chip, I'm not recommending a 9800X3D, but as an example, you could drop that in here, and then without needing an old chip at all, you could use this to flash the BIOS so it supports it, which is always a nice feature. You've also got this little heatsink here for your SSD, but as you see, it is fairly bare bones. It's not the most complete thing in the world. In order to actually start building our PC though, I'd highly advise that you do drop your motherboard down on the box itself. It's just easier, you've got far more light, you can sort of see everything, all the text on the board is really small, and it gives you just a good overview before you get started. Pay attention to the power that you have on the right hand side. This is called your ATX power. Then we have our 8-pin CPU power at the top left. And then in order to actually get our case to do anything, so when you press the power button, it needs to send a signal to your motherboard, or actually it's the other way around. It connects a circuit and obviously turns your system on. These are these little headers down the bottom here, if you like, these little pins. You do also have these fan headers here. This grey one is specifically for your CPU. You don't technically need to use it for that, but I would highly advise that you do so. That obviously stops the CPU from cooking itself, which would be very bad. We have some RGBs as well, so we've got LED and then digital LED. Depending on the board and how high-end it is, you usually have some more up here at the top as well. This gets all of the RGB to function within the system, unless you're using like an IQ system or something like that. And the last but certainly not least, we have this one down the bottom called F Audio. More often it's called HD Audio, and this is for an analog pair of headphones or a headset to actually plug in again to your case. But that's pretty much all you need to know. You've also got this one, I suppose, here called Clear CMOS. Moving on then to our next component, and arguably the most important after the GPU, it's the CPU. And you may have noticed that there's been a fair bit of press recently about the new B580 and presumably the B570 as well, being that you do need to pair it with a decent CPU, or you will find that your performance can suffer more so than some of its competition. So things like the 4060 or the 7600, for instance. And this is also called a 7600. This is a Ryzen 5 7600. And in an ideal world, you'd probably actually save yourself a little bit of money and go for the 7500F. But it seems that you can only buy that from system integrators or from AliExpress, and that's not something I would recommend to everyone. So certainly bear in mind, I know Editor Carl did buy one of these. He got it, tested the performance, and it seemed to work as expected. If you want to play it safe and you actually want slightly more performance, then this 6-core chip is going to be slightly better, but it is a fair bit more expensive. This, as I say, is the Ryzen 7600. It's a 6-core chip, and you just want to open up this socket, and then with this little lever, you just secure this down into place. Once that is safe and secure though, you can then arguably move on to the third most important part of your gaming PC, which is going to be the RAM. And I actually want to say I've kind of undercooked this one a little bit, because this was one of the first kits I was sent out from Corsair when DDR5 launched. So remember, this is DDR5, not DDR4, but this is 32 gigabytes of the stuff. But this one is actually running at 5200 megahertz, whereas I believe the kits that you can buy now, roughly for around about maybe $80, £75 or so, if you're looking in a sale in the right place, then actually the kit should be slightly faster than that. Obviously, you're aiming for as close to 6000 megahertz as possible, really, to unlock the true performance of this chip. But it's not the end of the world if it is slightly slower. And again, you're trying to save money. So would you really want to spend 25% more on some RAM that might give you an extra frame or two? Do make sure as well that you do put it in slots 2 and 4. I realize I'm in Marcus PC-centric talking mode. If you have them next to each other, you're actually going to get half the rated speed. And if you put them in slots 1 and 3, then your board isn't necessarily optimized for this. But obviously, if you're going for 4 RAM sticks, just chuck them in all 4. Once you have pushed your RAM down as far as it will go until it clicks into place, you then need to grab a couple of screwdrivers, or at least one screwdriver with a couple of heads. They're both Phillips crosshead. This one is going to be used for most of the screws, but for your SSD, this is where you need something that is a little bit more miniature. So we're going to remove the slot cover here, or this heat sink. Do make sure that you remove the plastic peel as well on the underside if you haven't already. This is just going to allow for a little bit of the heat from the SSD just to transfer onto this, and then the fans in the system should actually move that heat away. But as you can see, it's not the most ginormous one in the world. Crucial's P3 Plus, definitely not the highest end SSD in the world, but it's absolutely going to do ourselves the trick, and it is going to save ourselves a little bit of money as well. So that is pretty much everything then that we actually need on the motherboard, other than the cooler. And you don't have to buy one of these, because if you do go for the 7600, you should get a stock one inside the box that is going to be sufficient. Should do a decent enough job, but is going to be a little bit on the louder side. The temps are definitely going to be higher than I would like, really. So if you can spend around about like $20, $25 or so on something like this, it's going to look a lot better and it's going to give you much better performance. This is the Hyper 212. This one is the Halo edition, so you're going to need an addressable RGB for this, but I also figured it would go with the fans that we have. We can daisy chain them together, and hopefully we'll have a very good looking system. But you'll see that it's not like the largest heatsink in the world, but it's obviously a lot bigger than the default AM5 one. So what we're going to do then to actually get this ready to go on our board is to kind of break it down into into literally just the heatsink itself. We've got 2 screws inside there, and then you grab these little AMD brackets, then push it up from underneath and just make sure that that hole is perfectly lined up, then put the screw in. You see, PC gaming isn't difficult, it's just fiddly, or at least it's fiddly to build them. You could get someone else to do it, nothing wrong with that, but obviously you'll be paying for the privilege. We will need to remove the default mounting hardware though that comes on this. Very straightforward, 4 screws, that just comes off, along with the other side. Then obviously we'll need to grab ourselves some thermal compound, and this almost acts like a thermal bridge, if you like, between this top piece, which is called the IHS. So put a small ball in the middle, then we'll grab the top of the heatsink, and then obviously this will bridge that connection between the two, remembering to screw down in a cross pattern, which not only makes it easier, but also applies even pressure so that thermal compound will spread evenly underneath our chip. Once you've done that final bit, you should be able to pick it up with just the cooler. I'm not going to say I recommend this, because obviously if you haven't, then you'll find everything will come off. I've never done that before. You will probably have... But regardless, plop that back down, then obviously pick up the fan, make sure it's blowing the way you actually want it to blow. So here it's going into the cooler and then in theory out of the back. And then with the clips, just push that down into position. Then we have 2 cables. One is this 4-pin fan header that is going to plug into CPU fan. And then the other, I think, is going to daisy chain onto some of the others that we have over here. Allow me to kind of show you what I mean, because we haven't actually showed you any of this case yet, and we are now ready to go. So this is the Corsair 3500X. It's called X. That means it has glass on the front. That's their naming structure. I've tweaked this ever so slightly by actually, I can't remember if I turn these fans round or not. I'm using them as an intake here, but I have made sure that I've daisy chained them so that all of the RGB and all of the connections are kind of as out of sight as possible. This is one of those ones that I think it is a little bit overpriced personally for this case. This particular one is okay, you can get it for around about £100 or so, and it does come with 3 RGB fans. But this is also the sort of chassis that you can often find in a sale. So if you can do that, definitely is going to be worth it, but I would stay away from the IQ version of this because it's way more expensive. And whilst the quality of the chassis is absolutely fine, it's not like 140 pounds of dollars of chassis, which is what they're charging-ish. You're basically paying for the fans. But otherwise, surprisingly, there's not really too much to say about this. It didn't make my top cases list that I did last year. If you want to see my favorite cases at every price point, you can find that video in the top right corner of your screen. We go through loads. Because this is, as I say, it's fine. It doesn't really do anything drastically different. It's not bad. It doesn't do more than it needs to, and there are so many good chassis out there. It's just a box with some glass on it, really. And technically all cases are like that, but as I say, it doesn't really do anything to make itself stand out. So let's drop this chassis down into position. Because this is a cheaper motherboard, it does come with an I/O shield, so please don't forget to actually push this into the back. Then you will need to grab yourself a bag of screws, and it does come provided with the chassis, but I could be going mad here, so I don't think I've lost it. I don't think you get one inside the box, but if you do need to move the standoffs from the case, you can either use pliers to remove them. So at the moment they're set up for a full-size ATX motherboard, but here we're using M or M80X, so we need to plug in where it says M. But some cases give you this little standoff removal tool, which is really useful because you just drop this on top of your standoff and then it unscrews like that. Then you can pick up your motherboard, and if you've done everything right, it should line up with the I/O shield at the back, and then get this motherboard secured down. Oh, and yes, it does actually look as if my plan is gonna work, because what normally happens with motherboards like this is that if you use a full-size ATX chassis, the whole thing just has a load of cables coming up here and it doesn't always look as attractive as it should do. Whereas because we do have support for BTF motherboards, or any motherboards that have those reverse connections, we can actually kind of pilfer the holes that we have for those. I'll illustrate this look with our RGB, and that can connect like that. Then we do the same with our HD audio, all of our daisy chain fan speed, our front panel block to actually get this thing to turn on, and then hopefully our easier ones with our USB 3, then finally our USB-C. Then you can give this thing a spin, and there is just one more cable I think to plug in for now, and that is our addressable RGB for the cooler. This just daisy chains to the top fan. And then when we give this a spin around, you should see that actually for the most part our gaming PC is pretty much done. It's literally just power supply and graphics card. GPU should be pretty straightforward, as we've already got this ready to go. You will need to remove these slot covers, but thankfully they are removable and replaceable. But let's pick up our Challenger GPU now, shall we? And then hopefully slide this right in. clicks into position like that. And yes, okay, it doesn't look the most balanced system in the world because, again, with a normal ATX motherboard, this would be a slot lower. But I think considering this is a more budget-friendly system, I still think this is going to look awesome. And compared to so many that I've done on a shoestring budget, I'm not saying this is shoestring, definitely not. But for a budget-friendly gaming PC, this is definitely one of the better looking ones I've built. Almost there then. Last piece of the puzzle, the PSU, power supply unit. And this is pretty much my go-to budget power supply. We've talked about this loads of times on the channel before. It's from MSI, it's the MAG A650BN. It's usually available for about £55 or dollars or so. It's not the most fancy, it's not the most efficient, it's not even modular, so you have all of these cables that kind of just like dangle here, and if you don't need them, you still have to put them inside your system. But because it's only a 650 watt unit, you don't actually have that many cables to hide in the first place. It still gives you a load of expandability, and more importantly, really, it works, it functions, and it gives you a load of other money really to spend on other components in your system. You're going to want to just drop this into your rig, secure it down with the hex screws, and then of course you will be left with all of these cables. And it's important now to kind of, you don't have to be like mega tidy, but just think about what you're doing before you're doing it. Don't have like a load of things just tying themselves in a knot. Go for a short route and just, as I say, manage as you go really. So this needs to go up at the top. This is our 8-pin CPU. This goes up here at the top. And then last but not least, we do have these two 8-pin power connections that are going to be used for the graphics card. I think it's only a single 8-pin though, so that's why I've tidied this up nice and neatly. And this can actually kind of go underneath and then up. So this is what I mean about tidying as you go. Don't cross over things without really thinking about what you're doing, because it's just going to be a nightmare and you'll have a messy rig and the side panel won't necessarily close. But to be fair, that is one of the better things about this chassis. You've got loads of room here for extra devices and just to kind of be a little bit more untidy if you want to. And that is going to be useful because don't forget we have all of these cables that we're not using now, all of these SATA connections that we use for external things, or internal things I should say, like RGB hubs again. But we can kind of just neatly fold these up a little bit and then just tuck that out of sight, out of mind. It is just that single 8-pin for the graphics card. Oh, I haven't actually secured that down. Whoops. Make sure you secure your graphics card down. Our ATX, our 8-pin CPU. There you have it. As I say, I'm actually pretty impressed. This works. It's literally just this little cable here that's not the most attractive thing in the world. You could get an extension if you really wanted to neaten it up. But otherwise, I think this is a fair bit of a showpiece build, as I say, on something that's a bit more affordable. A budget-friendly rig that's got plenty of glass without any farce. I'll see myself out. Oh, I could have said glass without any arse. So as I grab ourselves a monitor, keyboard and mouse, of course don't forget that if you do want to grab your very own PC-centric mouse mat, I mean look how gorgeous this is, the quality is, it's not to die for, I would not die for my mouse mat, but it's an excellent mouse mat, perfect size look for 10 keyless keyboards. Grab yours today. Link is down below. And actually, one other thing to mention that I really should have done when I was doing the build is don't forget that this motherboard does not have Wi-Fi. There are loads that do, just look for Wi-Fi in the name, but obviously they are going to cost you a little bit more money, and if you're going to use a wired connection anyway, you don't need it necessarily, right? So this is the moment of truth. I hear noise. Not seeing any RGB yet though. Oh, the graphics card smells like, almost smells sweet, like a sweet shop. Where have they been manufacturing this card? As this is AMD, I'd say allow up to like 60 seconds, 2 minutes, and if you don't see anything, that's when you can panic. But that's what I want to see. Splash screen, press delete, or press Y to reset firmware TPM, because I've used this board before. Yes, that is what it's all about. And we've even got RGB. Let's take a proper look at this. I think this looks really good. How about that, everyone? I know this is not the absolute cheapest budget PC we've ever done on this channel, but again, this has so much potential because you can, of course, upgrade it. It's got that 7600. You can go to a 9 series or future AMD CPU if you want. We've got a 650 power supply, so if you want to upgrade this to like a Blackwell GPU or something in the future. I'm not saying it's going to be ideal, but the point is this is such a great platform to build upon, and it's such a great looking PC, whilst relatively speaking not costing an absolute ton. It's a bit loud actually at its default settings, but obviously we can tune that in the BIOS. Don't be too alarmed by this, it's not as scary as it used to be. I mean, this is actually quite nicely laid out. Essentially what we want to do is go down to where it says XMP/Expo profile, and you want to enable that just so we're getting the full rated speed of the RAM. But if that doesn't work and the thing starts boot looping, that's when you use that clear CMOS was going to say switch. Some motherboards have a switch. That clear CMOS header on the motherboard, remember with the screwdriver, do that, and then obviously you can just disable that if it doesn't work. That's going to give you a faster memory speed. Then we can go into Smart Fan 6. The main thing really is that it's quite heavily weighted here on the left-hand side, which means that the CPU doesn't have to be that hot for the fan to spin up. So I'm going to set a more conservative graph, and then I'm going to do the same with our other fans. And of course, if you haven't already, you will need to grab yourselves a copy of Windows. This is Windows 11, and you'll just want to whack that in the back. It will automatically load into the Windows installer. There you can just follow the on-screen instructions, get yourself logged in, and you should be pretty much set up and ready to go. So just give me a couple of hours, get all of our drivers, all of our games installed and uploaded, and we can test some performance. Oh, and ladies and gentlemen, this wouldn't be a PC-centric video without getting very confused and a few things happening and weird stuff. I'll start by saying that, as I say, actually I really think that the look of this system is very, very good for something in this caliber. Only thing I'll say is that I ended the last bit, didn't I, by saying I wouldn't change anything, and I really would. I think this is kind of like the final strike for me on the Crucial P3 Plus. When I'm downloading everything at the same time, the whole system, it's not that it locks up, it just like 100% and it's just waiting on the SSD. And bear in mind, you could spend like an extra £10 or dollars on something like a Lexar NM790, and in theory you'd get better performance. I think that would be worth doing, because it's annoying to go and build all of this and then let the SSD actually be the bottleneck. Only other thing to note as well is do bear in mind that there's no recording still, annoyingly, on this GPU and in this current version of the Arc software. It will be coming, but in the meantime, if you want to do what we're doing here today, then you are going to have to use OBS. So let's jump in arguably with the hardest test actually, and we're going to start off with some Star Wars Outlaws. And yes, I know still isn't everyone's cup of tea. Yes, I know I still haven't progressed the game, and this is currently set to the low preset, but do not let that deceive you, because this is still a very, very intense game, because ray tracing is actually kind of baked into this game. You cannot turn it off. And this is where I think the Arc cards are definitely going to come in handy, because they are actually clearly able to cope with it. I mean, we're getting around about 80 FPS or so with this turned on. So you can have a look inside and you've got all of this lovely fog. You can just see this is an incredibly realistic scene, and it's something that not a lot of games manage to pull off quite like this. I'm always very, very impressed actually when I fire this up in terms of the visuals. And the fact that at 1440p on the cheapest new graphics card really that you can buy is, what, 78 FPS or so. I think that is very, very impressive. And if you have a look at our frame time graph, this is the bit that kind of dictates exactly how smooth it is, or at least it represents how smooth the game is. And this is not what we were getting when we did our even cheaper rig with that Intel CPU and very, very cheap motherboard. Now turning this down to 1080p, and now you can see you're getting a really nice high refresh rate experience. Again, especially if you have adaptive sync, this is what you want from a brand new gaming PC, and this is what Arc is all about. When it works properly, and again, remember my initial experiences with the B580 weren't great, but glad to say so far, so good. Haven't run into any of those same issues or new issues with this particular B570. And of course, remember that this is supposed to be a next generation title. I know this hasn't sold very well. I know you might not like this game, but this is a great example of really of what we have now and what should be coming in the not too distant future from most AAA releases. And the fact that we can run this at 1080p at 100 FPS with ray tracing turned on is what you want from a new GPU. But moving across from a game that not everyone likes to one I think is very well loved. This of course is some Cyberpunk. We have this set at XeSS quality. We do have this running at 1440p and the preset is high. No ray tracing at the moment. And as you can see, this is a great experience. We're currently getting around about 78 to 82 FPS or so. And this is basically what I'd almost call like the pure experience. I mean, not everyone is going to want to use XeSS, but realistically, any upscaler, especially if you have a higher resolution monitor, at this level, I would definitely highly recommend that you do try it. I'm not saying you should use it, especially at 1080p, but 1440p, it is definitely going to be worth using in a game like this, where you do need to use a bit of AI just to give yourself a little bit more of an edge. But I am interested in what happens if we turn XeSS off, because as I say, not everyone is going to want to do that. And what has that done to the frame rate? Well, obviously, as expected, it has lowered it down. We're now looking at, call it 60 FPS, but it is slightly lower. We'll set it again to quality, and then we'll scroll down and find ray tracing, and we'll turn just the reflections on for now. Let's not go too crazy. I just want to see what that does to the frame rate. So we did have about 90 or so before, didn't we? But yeah, you can see that it's pretty much actually the same as it was without ray tracing, but without any AI whatsoever, right? So by using that upscaler, you've essentially allowed yourself to get the ray tracing as well. And there's no doubt about it that the game definitely looks better with the reflections, but it's one of those things that you kind of want to be able to use all of it to get the most out of it. Let's try ultra quality, because this is 1080p, so obviously our resolution was a little bit more reduced. Yeah, that does look better, but it's not night and day, to be honest. Actually, interestingly, our frame rate is pretty much staying the same. I'm wondering whether our bottleneck is actually from the ray tracing portion now. But ladies and gentlemen, I now think it's time to move on to my favorite bit of these videos, the bit that really matters, the multiplayer experience. And as you can see, this is some Apex Legends. We've got this set to high, I was gonna say the high preset, there aren't really presets with this. High settings across the board, I've manually changed it. The only thing that is set to ultra are the textures, because we obviously have the 8 gigabytes or the 10 gigabytes of VRAM needed for this in this particular instance. You can see we're using around about 7 gig of VRAM, but yeah, our frame rate is around about 150 FPS, so that is not too shabby whatsoever, especially again, bearing in mind we are running this at 1440p. Interestingly enough, it doesn't seem as if our frame rate has actually increased that much. We've gone up to about 160 or so, and again, this is one of the frustrations that you will find with Arc. It's either a blessing or a curse depending on the resolution that you play at, because it seems that there's not often that much difference between 1440 and 1080. I don't know whether it's an architecture thing, optimization, but this is one of the things we've consistently seen since the original Arc GPUs launched. If you're glass half full, let's just go with you get better 1440p than you would expect. Well, ladies and gentlemen, after what has to be around about 15 minutes or so for the game to actually load all of the textures, again, you only need to do this once. And what you're seeing now is some Halo Infinite, and again, this is one of those games that doesn't actually have that much scaling technology. What it does have seems to work quite well, like the internal just resolution slider upscales it quite nicely, so this is actually a 4K monitor, so this looks arguably a lot better than just normal 1440p will. But as you can see, the frame rate we're getting isn't as high as it is in Apex Legends, around about 60 FPS or so. But I really do want to see what happens if we turn this down to 1080p now. It's another one of those scenarios where the frame rate at 1080p doesn't go up as dramatically as you would usually expect. So if you are a big Halo Infinite fan, I probably would turn some of the settings down a little bit more just to get the absolute best out of this, but I mean, I don't think high settings is unreasonable for this, is it? This is almost more what I would have expected just in general from a budget-friendly gaming PC, right? 1080p, 1440p, probably between 60 and 100 FPS, but we have excelled really across the board at pretty much everything that we have played. Now, here's the thing. This is Arc, so it is going to be more prone to issues than NVIDIA cards and AMD, but as we've already mentioned, I haven't really come across any issues other than just like a really annoyingly slow install of the driver, the fact that you can't actually record your gameplay at the moment, but I know that most people probably don't really care about either of those things in the grand scheme of things. So actually, if you are looking to build a budget-friendly gaming PC in 2025, then I think the B570 definitely should be on your radar, as long as you can get it for that price. My fear is that this is going to be overinflated with the third-party coolers and things, and if they're in high demand, then people will be paying a little bit more than they need to. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. What do you make of our GPU? What do you make of our system? And if you have enjoyed this video, then please smash the like button. It really helps out. Get yourself subscribed, and if you do want to check out current pricing on anything that was featured in this rig, you can find it listed down below with our affiliate links. And while you're down there, why not bask in the RGB brilliance of the IQ Link Titan RX coolers? This next generation of Corsair all-in-ones look absolutely stunning, with 20 RGB LEDs on the pump head and 8 per RX fan for jaw-dropping visuals. You also get interchangeable cap swap for proper custom styles. Connecting it together is dead simple too, all thanks to Corsair IQ Link, and it comes in black or white, 240, 280 and 360 sizes. Get your call on today, learn more with the link below. But thank you guys so much for watching, we'll catch you in the next one.